Hi, this is Chris from Orange Coast College's Art Department, talking today about three-quarter view and how it's used in illustration and entertainment art. What we're looking at right now is a box in SketchUp, and we're looking at it in three-quarter view. So what that means is we can see the top, side, and front of the object all at once in perspective. So this is a key view because it gives us lots of information and it's readily understandable as a drawing type for viewers to understand a design. And so when we're designing and illustrating things, we'll often be showing a three-quarter view as the primary view. And sometimes we'll also have other orthographic views such as the top view, the front view, and the side view. And these show measurable detail, but the one that most viewers readily understand is a three-quarter view like this. And usually we're seeing the top. However, you might have an instance of, let's say, doing an airship or an airplane where maybe your three-quarter view shows the bottom. But for most objects, showing the top is great because as with this box, we can also see inside a little bit with a three-quarter view. So one thing that is key to understanding that you're looking at three-quarter view or a three-quarter perspective is that the horizon line is much higher than the object. It's way up here where you see this gray ground plane meet that slight gradation. So your object is far below the horizon line typically. Sometimes you got a big object. So let's take a look at a pirate ship. So normally when we're designing this, most of the visual interest is on the hull, and so we can still see the top, front, and sides of the hull. Yes, the masts go a little bit above the horizon line, but this would still be considered a three-quarter view because we're looking down and into it. We can see those top surfaces of the deck. If any of those deck openings were folded open, we could see into the hull down there. And that would be of interest when we're trying to communicate how a design works for something. So let's flip on back to our box and just talk about another term. Often we'll also talk about drawing through an object. And what that means is we're drawing the planes that we can't normally see. So here is a normal view. But if we wanted to see into it, we might, let's say, talk about an X-ray view. This shows us with some opacity, we can still see through the object and we can see those far sides. That helps us set up the structure of the illustration. It helps us with the perspective and understanding. We also might call this a wireframe in which we just see the edges and we're not really seeing the planes. And this gives us the sort of ultimate visibility into the unseen parts. But typically we might be X-ray or a normal view like this. So let's flip over to Photoshop and see how we could set this drawing up. Right now I've got a grid that's already set up. It's a two-point perspective grid, and you can learn how to do this by checking out the video in the OCC Art Department channel about setting up a two-point perspective in Photoshop. The one thing I want to point out here is that I've raised the horizon line really high here. Let me draw it in here. This is nice and high, and my object is going to be well below it. So if you look back here, my horizon line is high, I'm looking down. Same idea here. That horizon line is high, and I'm going to draw down below it. That's key to understanding three-quarter view. If your horizon line is going through your object, you're not in three-quarter view. You're closer to first-person point of view. All right, so let's get started. I'll set up the basics of my, let's do a treasure chest to go with that ship. So let's come up here, dots. Here's the side. Let's come on down here. I'm just interpolating off of the perspective grid set up. Now if I can draw lightly in here and draw through to see the back side of that. And then maybe let's find the center of these sides so we can draw in. Let's draw a rounded top to this. Like that, and right in here, I'm just gonna lightly sketch over so I can set up the same thing on this side. Like that, and that's a little rough, but this can be the base setup. I can take my opacity down low on this, throw in a new layer, and now I can sort of sketch how I might normally want to. I'm going to put some metal bracing and ornament. Some handles, maybe a big ornamental latch with a lock, keyhole, some more. And then sketch in a little wood material. And I'm following the perspective guidelines here so I can get this right. So once I turn off those layers, I've turned off my perspective grid, I've turned off my initial wireframe boxy setup, and I've got a little bit of a sketch here, and I can continue to improve this. This is a pretty quick one for the sake of this video, but there's lots of interesting things you can do, but that's the general setup that you want to use. You want to get a 2 or 3 point grid perspective. You want to draw through the basic shapes of your object and get that perspective nailed down. You can then subsequently add layers of refinement above that. So to recap, here's our box in 3/4 perspective. Here's our ship in 3/4 perspective. Here's our treasure chest in 3/4 perspective. Well, I hope that helps you to keep on making great art.